Hello, and welcome to On Second Thought, a bonus series of And the Runner-Up Is. On July 24th, 2018, I released the episode of And the Runner-Up Is on the 1998 Best Picture race, where we discussed Saving Private Ryan as the likely runner-up that lost Best Picture to Shakespeare in Love. But on second thought, what if the runner-up was really Life is Beautiful? Hello, and welcome back to On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is, where we discuss another Best Picture nominee that we did not cover on the regular show. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, and today I have my first guest, who has been on the show multiple times now. He first joined me to discuss Born on the 4th of July and the films of 1989, as well as The Defiant Ones and the films of 1958. He also joined me and Rob LaCuria on the very first episode of On Second Thought, talking about Get Out. Writer and podcaster for Next Best Picture, Josh Parham.
Hello, hello. I'm so glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. And my other guest is joining us for the first time, also from Next Best Picture. Please welcome to the show, Lauren LaMagna.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, welcome, welcome. And we are talking about Life is Beautiful, which is another foreign language film that got nominated for Best Foreign Language Film and Best Picture. We just talked about Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon a few episodes ago, and here we are again. So let's get into a quick summary of the film. Life is Beautiful is an Italian comedy drama set during the Holocaust that tells the story of a Jewish man named Guido who has a very optimistic and playful outlook on life, who comes to the city to work for his uncle, and he ends up falling in love with a woman named Dora, and they eventually have a child named Joshua, who is around 5 or 6 by the time we flash forward, and then the three of them are rounded up and sent to a concentration camp. And while they're there, and Guido and Joshua are together as Dora is sent to the women's section of the camp, Guido tries to protect Joshua from the horrors of their surroundings, sort of by pretending that this is all a game to win a tank. And as time goes on, it just becomes harder and harder for Guido to protect his son. So the film was directed by Roberto Benigni, who co-wrote the screenplay with Vincenzo Shermani, and it stars Roberto Benigni as Guido, Nicoletta Braschi as Dora, and Giorgio Cantarini as Joshua. And Life is Beautiful made $57 million at the U.S. box office, was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, winning 3, but not Best Picture. So here we have Life is Beautiful. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about whether we've seen it a long time ago, whether we've just seen it recently, how our opinions have changed in that time. Let's start with our newest guest, Lauren. What are your thoughts on Life is Beautiful?
I simply love this movie. I feel like the first time I saw it, I think I was in middle school for a festival called Carnevale, which is an Italian festival, and for all the students who were taking Italian, who were mainly of Italian heritage, my Italian teacher showed us this movie, and I remember being absolutely in love with it. It was one of my first foreign films experiences, and I think it was my first Italian film that I've seen. And I remember just loving it, and I haven't seen it since until recently when I was preparing for this podcast. And I only really remembered the Holocaust version, that's part of the movie. Mm-hmm. But as I rewatched it, seeing this beautiful love story and this innocent, courting and this like quirky, silly guy, and then it just totally turns into the story of a father and his love for his child. That's what really sold me to seeing an innocent and pure and truthful story about this man and his love for his family. And I love, as everyone, Roberto Benigni is one of my favorites. And I'm so glad I know this now and just not the image that where a lot of people know when they think life is beautiful, they think of the sequence when Roberto won the Oscar and he like climbs across the stairs to the stage. I'm so glad I know the film, and I every time someone talks about foreign films, Life is Beautiful is always at the top of the list for me.
Wow, high praise. Excellent. So, Josh, how about you?
Um, my experience with this movie is a little different from that.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly when I first saw this, but it was years and years ago, probably when I was doing my biggest deep dive into the Oscars and past movies that had been rewarded. And at that time, I remember thinking that it was fine. I didn't love it, but I just didn't really hate it that much either. I thought it was just sort of okay. And it has been a while since I had last saw it, and I revisited it for this podcast, this discussion. And I find it to be a movie that has a really interesting idea at the center of it, but for me, I don't know if it's really executed all that well. And I think part of that is because I don't know if the movie really gets the tonal shifts all that well. I don't think they really land for me. And I also kind of have a problem with Benigni in this movie. And I think that if you don't find him to be a charming figure and have a lot of charisma, I think that a lot of his antics come across as very kind of grating and annoying. And unfortunately, they do for me. And I think overall, it's a movie that it's not terrible, but I find that a lot of the things that it tries to do, it doesn't really go about in the most successful way to execute them. So it's not really a movie that works all that well for me, sadly.
Very interesting. We have two very different reactions here, and that is very reflective, I think, of how people tend to consider Life is Beautiful at the time as well as at this point. I feel like it's a bit of a divisive film, and this is another one of those that I've been revisiting for on second thought, like with Lincoln, like with Manchester by the Sea, like with The Descendants, where I was a little bit uneasy about revisiting again because I didn't have the best response to those films when I first saw them, and then revisiting them for the show, I kind of had a very different appreciation for Manchester by the Sea. It didn't really work so much for The Descendants for me, but with Life is Beautiful, I'm happy to say that I'm more positive on it than I was when I saw it when I was, I don't know how old, maybe 13 or 14. I'm still not sure how I feel about the different tones overall, but I have a lot more of an appreciation of what Benigni was trying to do with this. I actually really respect wanting to tell a different kind of story about the Holocaust with a lighter touch that also doesn't necessarily end up, negating the horrifying experiences that millions of Jews faced in that time. And a lot of the film is earnest and sentimental and I think engineered to give you a certain reaction. And I think, we all know that movies in part are engineered to provide some sort of response in the audience anyway, but some are a little better at hiding the seams than others. Here, I think it's very much wearing its heart on its sleeve, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's, again, not always everyone's thing. So I want to sort of delve into the use of comedy and fantasy that is especially explored with the Guido character, and I'm curious what the both of you really think about that aspect of the film and how it blends with the tragedy, because there was a lot of writing, especially of the time, about whether this approach was appropriate. So Lauren, as someone who clearly appreciates the film more, how do you feel like the tones match here?
I personally do like the second half better than the first. And when you talk about the negative response about having a lighthearted Holocaust film, Taika Waititi to this day got the same type of backlash. It wasn't all negative, but he still got some. So 20 23 years later, that's still something that not a lot of audiences are totally comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if this film didn't exist, I feel like Jojo Rabbit would have gotten a much harsher reaction. But I think he's really sweet. And I think he's a lot more better in the second half. Instead, when he's courting him, I could totally see people seeing Guido being like this really annoying guy who really just won't let this girl go and won't let her like calm down. He just keeps following her, which can be a little weird. I get it. Yeah, but like I feel like once, he gets the girl and once he has that family, they do seem like a solid trio and the solid family that they all love each other and they're all really happy. So once that's part of the story kicks off, I am fully invested and I believe the love between all three of those members.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I think that there is something initially about that concept of being in this situation where life is beautiful and it is like fun and whimsical in a certain respect. And then you get this hard shift in the second half where things become a lot more dour, but you want to still try to hold on to that. I do think that idea is interesting. I think my problem, though, is especially in regards to the first half, there are moments when the darkness sort of starts to encroach on the life of these people. And I don't think the movie does a necessarily great job of focusing on like the seriousness of that or have a real commentary on it. And it just feels like it introduces this notion and then quickly lets it go by the wayside. And so that by the time we get to the second half, when we do get this very hard swing, to a certain extent, I just don't feel like the movie has earned enough credit to kind of go into it with this somewhat lighter perspective on it. And I think, honestly, my biggest problem with the tone is that it's centered on the Guido character. And we've already mentioned Jojo Rabbit. I think that the successful version of this movie, to me, is to put it within the Joshua character, to make it more strictly from the perspective of his son, which I think would allow you to accept the more fantastical, whimsical tone of the film trying to exist within this very dark reality. And I think that the way that this particular movie goes about it, with centering instead on the father, I think that's what creates like the disconnect for me, because it's like at some point Guido has to be like real with his kid, and it sort of stretches believability, I think, centering it on an adult rather than a child.
Yeah, I mean the comedy itself is a little bit hit or miss for me. I think the moments that really bug me a little bit more are when like Guido is keeping up the fantasy of it all for Joshua that is in front of the other prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't really much of a different perspective on like how any of them are responding to all of this. They mostly go along with it just to continue to protect Joshua, but I wish there was maybe another perspective that we heard from one of the prisoners about this being such a grave situation, and here's this guy who's sort of making light of it. Even if it's for his kid, he's still being very goofy, and others could interpret it as annoying, and it's just kind of odd to me that there's no alternative perspective there, like in that moment that Guido is translating the German to Italian for the guards. And he's like explaining the rules, and Guido is still pretending that it's all a game to win a tank, when it's like, these people might actually want this information to prevent themselves from being killed. I mean, I don't know.
And there's no other parents of kids there that like want to do something different with how they want to communicate with their kids. Like, we don't even see any other children here. We hear about them, but we see no interaction between the other kids or with their parents. And I feel like that's kind of a bit of a cheat that the movie wants to have. And I find that it wants to like massage parts of the story to fit the tone that it wants to work with without ever really considering a broader narrative that would obviously be around all these characters.
I get that. I'd say like the main issue for me is that I think it spends too much time pre-Holocaust than it does when they're actually in the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't get it, because once they, arrive at the camp, you hit the ground running to the end of the film, really. And if we spent more time building up to that, to the departure of, them being arrested and actually seeing, kids in the camp, well, that's like, I just don't think they had enough time with the budget that they had and the scope of how to make the film. I think they spent way too much time on the love story between Guido and his wife and not the actual event of the Holocaust, which I think if we stood probably like 70-30 with those respects, I think it would have been a much more stronger film.
Yeah. Well, we can talk a little more about that first half of the film, which is before the concentration camp, before Joshua's even born, and it's sort of just that, I guess, kind of a cute romantic comedy almost, where Guido keeps finding Dora in all these places, and it's the Buongiorno Principessa, that whole thing. It gets a tad stalkerish, but just with how often he keeps popping up and surprising her wherever she is, even at her own wedding. But, at the same time, she is really charmed by him. And I think she has a lot of the same playful sort of spirit to her that he does. And I think that's actually something that's telegraphed well, that bears out when Dora is realizing that her husband and son are being taken away, and she decides to impulsively get on the train so she can be with him, even realizing full well that they're not going anywhere good. So
I will say that that actress, Nicoletta Brascini, I'm probably butchering her name, is really phenomenal in those little silent, subtle moments.
Yeah.
Like when she walks to the house and she knows that they're taken, and then when she does say, I want to go on the train, put me on the train. I thought those were great moments for her. And those are moments I didn't notice when I was, 12, 13. I wasn't really paying attention to those. But now having this kind of critical lens, I guess, seeing those moments with, an older, more experienced eye was really cool seeing her stand out, because I really loved those subtle little moments of hers.
Yeah, she's the best performance in the film from my perspective. And I think that even in that first half, where I do find myself struggling to connect with the film based on really just Benigni, I really don't like him in the first half of the movie. I just find his energy to be so annoying. And I get that that's like a personal thing. I think your mileage will vary whether or not you buy into this performance and buy into the relationship that's being created. But I do think that she gives a lot, even in the first half, when I'm not really into the tone and what the story is doing. Because I do agree with you, Lauren, that I think this film spends way too much time before the events of the Holocaust, and it just really isn't all that interesting to me, unfortunately.
It did very much surprise me just how much time was spent in that first half, because sort of like I think what Lauren was saying was that you didn't really remember all that big stretch before the camp, right?
Yeah, I remember none of that. I think I remember the dinner scene where she runs away with him, but other than that, that's still like 45 minutes into the movie.
Yeah.
I remember no part of the first act whatsoever, which isn't a good sign.
Probably not.
Yeah, well, you know what? I do remember the first half taking a long time before we got to the camp. I did remember that. What I didn't remember, though, is that to the movie's credit, and I said this before, there are moments where it shows you the encroaching nature of the Nazis into the country. You have this inspector who's going to come to the school and give this racist tirade. You have the graffiti that shows up that is targeting Jews. And I did appreciate that the movie was making an effort to show that, these people think that life is idyllic and tranquil, but there's this darkness that's encroaching within. I think my problem, though, is that then the movie doesn't really ever take a moment to have the characters recognize that at all, or recognize how serious it could be. It just is introduced and is brushed aside, which there is a point even to that, but I don't think the movie really lands the point as well as it could, and it ends up just becoming more frustrating until you get to the second half of the film.
Yeah, and some of that encroaching nature of the Nazis, that whole threat, is also very reminiscent of what Cabaret did, of course, which is to show how, it feels just like normal life, and then you suddenly have this horse that's been painted, and it's targeting, it's saying, Achtung, Jewish horse. And there's like signs on the windows, and there's little comments made at the wedding, that are very inflammatory and are just sort of said with a bit of normalcy. But I mean, you're right that it sort of drops off after that and doesn't really explore that further. But those were the moments that I definitely did not remember watching it all those years ago, that I found to be pretty incisive. And there are those moments where there's that snap back to reality that I find to be some of the most interesting parts of the film, especially with the Guido character, of when he's not necessarily performing for Joshua and he's realizing the full extent of what his life has become and what he has to do, and this looming existential threat that I think allows Benigni as an actor to at least show a different layer to his performance that's not just broad and comic, So those are like the little moments that I really appreciate that aren't focused on too much, but that do indicate to me that there was enough thought put into it.
Yeah, I just still go back to moments where, like, especially with that horse, for instance, like when that horse shows up with the graffiti on it, it's a very sobering moment, and it's so effective, especially in this scene that's supposed to be light and jolly, and it really brings you attention to the seriousness of it, of the situation that's about to happen. But then I think when you then use that horse in the getaway sequence with Dora and Guido and escaping the wedding, and I just find that to be such an odd disconnect to just follow up on, and it just makes me feel like the movie doesn't have a tight handle on its switching of tones, and I think that is the biggest issue that I have with the movie overall.
I mean, I want to get back actually a little more to Dora, that character, and Nicoletta's performance, where those were some of the more effective elements of the film to me, is when her screen time really diminishes by the second half, almost
which
by half.
Sucks.
Yeah, but all of the moments that they cut to her and she has that flash of recognition that her husband and her son are still safe and they're still trying to communicate with her, whether it's through the opera that they're playing that she recognizes, or it's just the two of them over the loudspeaker just talking.
Yes, she's a phenomenal subtle actress. It's really hard, and I don't think Hollywood, domestically or like internationally, we don't really value subtle actors and subtle acting, but she doesn't really need any dialogue. She just needs the camera on her, and she can react and she can create everything that she needs. So like, I don't think she's, even with her lack of screen time, she doesn't really speak that much in the second half either. She's just reacting to what's happening around her. And that's where I think it's the most profound moments, particularly even in the second act, is when, the music's playing and she's realizing what's happening and she's just reacting and absorbing what's going on. And she doesn't need to say anything. She doesn't really do anything. She just needs to look and have the camera hold on her. And she gives the audience exactly what they need.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's so good in the film, and even in that first half where I do struggle, especially with the relationship, and I sometimes don't buy it. If I buy it at all, it is 100% because of her, because it's not really his antics, which I don't find all that charming, but I could believe that she would find them charming and endearing, right. And exactly. That to me is a signal of a really great performer, and it's why I do think that she gives the best performance in the film.
Well, what do we think of little Joshua here as a performance, as a kid performance? I don't know if people consider it to rank up with like the Tatum O'Neills or the Jacob Tremblays of the world necessarily, but did we find his performance to be effective? And since this really ends up being, by the end, at least through narration, sort of his story and his looking back, what do you guys think?
He's no Jacob Tremblay or he's not up there.
Yeah,
he's fine.
He's cute.
He is a very cute little kid. Yeah, I don't find his performance to be all that endearing to me. He's not bad, but it, like we said, it's not really one of those performances that really just draws you in with this emotional wallop. And I think a part of that is also just the nature of the way the film is constructed, that even though by the end it becomes his story, it never really becomes his story. And I don't think there's ever really a moment where you feel like you're watching this film through his perspective, because you're not. And it's always through the Guido character. And I think that diminishes a little bit the true impact you can get, because Joshua just ends up becoming a pretty passive character throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, I would say Josh was more of an object than a subject. He's just there, and he's there besides his dad during the whole thing. And it's normally when he's talking to, like, Guido would be talking to Joshua, and then he tells him to hide, and that's the scene. Or he'll just run up to wherever Guido is.
Yeah.
He's not really, he doesn't have his own story. He is just there. And it very much is, he is there for us to side with Guido, for Guido to have a purpose in the story.
Yeah, and going back to what Josh said a little bit earlier, I almost wonder how this story would have been like if it was more focused on him, if he was the main character, and that we were seeing all of this through his eyes, because I feel like a lot of the criticisms that maybe Josh or I would have with the film wouldn't be as there if we're seeing it through his eyes, through his limited sort of childlike, fantastical sort of view of the world.
I mean, that's basically what Jojo Rabbit did.
Right.
That's the approach that that movie took.
Right.
And I think that some of the criticisms that people had against that movie being lighthearted and a little bit more like on the fantastical side, and didn't really appreciate that being for a Holocaust movie. I think the response from a lot of people was, well, it's from the perspective of a kid, and the perspective of somebody that doesn't necessarily know the gravity of the situation. And I think that had Life is Beautiful taken a similar approach, it would have justified some of those decisions that other people find very off-putting.
Yeah, well, I think the ending itself is actually very effective. I think when I first watched the film, I was a little bit sort of over it by the end of just sort of how sweet the ending is. But watching it again, I had a very much a newfound appreciation for those last moments, even though there is still a level of tragedy to it. It's ultimately this survivor story. It's the story of how this boy and his mother survived, and how his father helped him in a way that was life-changing for him. And that moment where the American tank comes and Joshua is just elated by it, and then when he sees his mother, it's very emotional. And honestly, those are the moments of the connection between the boy and his mother that affect me the most. But then
No, yeah, I'm a
yeah,
big fan of the ending because, the way I took it, at the end of the day, it really is about a father trying to preserve his child's innocence as much as possible.
yeah,
And at the end of the day, he kind of did. He's probably won't be as affected by kids in the Holocaust who were totally aware of what was going on when they were there. So seeing that, he at the end he sees his mother, they survived. And he's like, oh, and we got this tank. We did it. We won.
mm-hmm.
It shows me that, Guido did it. He preserved as much as this boy's innocence as he possibly could, which I think is really touching.
The moment where the tank shows up, I think, is a pretty powerful moment, and but I think another reason why it is because that's a moment where we are firmly in Joshua's perspective, and I think that's the reason. I don't think it's an accident that is one of the more effective moments in the film, because we really get his excitement that this tank has shown up and is the reward for this quote unquote game that he's been playing, and I do admit that, yes, when he gets reunited with his mom at the end, it's a very touching moment. I do kind of have an issue with the way that scene kind of goes about, because he says he sees his mom, but then we don't get any cutaway to where his mom is. It's sort of awkwardly shot, and I don't know, ending on a freeze frame, that's a gamble. You're either gonna like that or it's a choice. It always is a choice, and wasn't really a choice that I really liked that much, but I get it. So I think that the ending has some really great things in it, but it's also sort of clumsily handled in other places.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at this ending, and you also just have to think about just how rare of a story this would be compared to the millions and millions who lost their lives, whose family has just been torn apart. Even some families, their lineage was just cut off because of this. And you come to recognize just how rare of a situation this is, where even though it is a very uplifting ending, it's still, when you think about the vast majority, this is not how things ended up.
And I would also like to say, with the Holocaust, a lot of people just assume that it's just Eastern Europe, that it's just Poland and it's just Germany and it's just places there. Not a people think that Jewish people live in Italy because it's such a predominantly Catholic country. So I do like that this film does showcase the Italian Jewish story, that there were victims of the Holocaust that were Italians and Jewish as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it honestly makes me also just wonder, like, where Joshua's life goes from here. This experience was very different compared to most survivors of this horrible incident, where, he was very much protected by this entire situation and probably has a very different outlook on that. And I wonder just how he grows up and sort of how he reconciles with all of that. It brings those questions to mind, I think, for me at least.
Yeah, it really creates him to be a very interesting character that, unfortunately, I just don't really think the movie invests that much time in. And, we've already discussed, if this was a movie that was more focused on him as a character and we spent maybe a little less time with Guido before the Nazis really came into the country, and did focus more on Joshua's perspective before, during, and after all of this, I just think that's a much stronger story to tell than the one that we got here.
Well,
I agree, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, there's been quite a bit of criticism on this episode so far, but Lauren, since you did say that you love it still so much, I was curious, just from your perspective, just even in spite of some of these flaws that even you can agree with, what is the special quality of this film that still resonates for you?
I just think it's made with love. Like, it really is. Like, it's an alternate viewing of the Holocaust, because I feel like a lot of Holocaust films are just so heavy and so dark. And the ones that, and again, like, I first saw this 10, 11, 12, 13, around that time. So to see a different type of Holocaust film that wasn't this like hardcore documentary or this really depressing story, and it's something that really is at its core about family, particularly like a parental child story, because that's what drives me. I like the romance, but that doesn't really sell me. Like, if I was Dora, I wouldn't have fallen for it. I would have been creeped out. But seeing what a father would do to help preserve his child's innocence and just help his child get out of it and do whatever he can because he loves his child, that's what makes the movie for me.
And in fairness, like, I do understand the appeal of that concept, and I think that sort of intellectually, I find that to be a very interesting story to tell. And I think that maybe the difference that I have is I just didn't find it to be that well executed. But if you did find it to be well executed, I can understand that you would really connect to that message. And I do recognize that the core of that message is very fascinating. I just think that the movie didn't really go about it in the most successful way on my part.
Yeah. So I think we can probably all agree, at least, that just sort of on concept, on Benigni wanting to set out to tell a very different kind of story that had really not been seen that much at all in many different respects, I think that is very commendable, even if the execution isn't always working for some. But again, I do respect people who really connect to it. And if you look at the grander reaction to this film, most people find it to be extraordinarily effective emotionally. And I don't want to take that away from them. But, at the end of the day, for me, it's still not a movie that will be held up for me as just a definitive Holocaust movie, or even on a lot of different levels. I don't necessarily rate it as high, but I definitely respect the fact that it exists and the fact that it's such a risky decision on a filmmaking level that ultimately, at the end of the day, I think won over a vast majority of people, even if the criticism can be loud at times. So, any last thoughts on Life is Beautiful before we move on to the Oscars?
The only thing I think I would mention is something that I did like about the film. I really thought the score was very, very good. I
Yes.
loved the music to this film. I thought that was actually something that fit well in whatever tone it was going for. I found the music really aided in that, sometimes even more than like the writing of the performances did. So big shout out to the score.
Yes, Nicola Piovani. Very good
Yeah.
score.
I would also say I really liked the editing in this film. I don't know like the exact like terminology for certain shots, but like there's one shot where both Dora and Guido walk into their house, and then a few seconds later Joshua walks out, and I just love those types of shots. And I think in general it's a really well edited film, and I normally don't notice that stuff, but I noticed it here, and I thought it was great.
Yeah, I think I can agree just on a filmmaking level. It's pretty pretty spectacular visually, and again with that score I think really aids in just transforming you into that world again. And just one other note that I wanted to mention is just that, at this point in my show, I'm talking about films from the 40s and this very classic era of Hollywood. And I think that's really what Benigni was trying to emulate a lot with this film. And just on the level of the earnestness and just the very simple universal message that, I can appreciate a filmmaker who wants to go back to that classic feeling again. And, like I said, clearly it resonated with a lot of people. So when we come back, we will be discussing the awards run of Life is Beautiful and discuss whether it could have been a potential Best Picture winner at one point or a runner-up to Shakespeare in Love.
And the Oscar goes to Roberto!
Thank you, Sophia. I leave here the Oscar, but I want you. I want to be rocked by the waves of your beauty. Come here. Thank you, thank you. This is a moment of joy, and I want to kiss everybody because you are the image of the joy. And he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity sunrise, that said the poet. And this is wonderful to be here. Wonderful. I feel like now really to dive in this ocean of generosity. This is too much. Your generosity, this is... and how do you say when the ray... The hailstorm, it's a hailstorm of kindness, of gratitude for you. And really, I would like to thank everybody did the movie because without them, I couldn't fly with this movie. Everybody who did, the producer, the screenwriter Cerami, Elda Ferri and Gianluigi Braschi, Nicola Piovani, Vittorio Cecchigori, Harvey Weinstein, Miramax people, thank you very much for what you did. And also I would like to thank my parents in Vergaio, in the little village in Italy. They gave me the biggest gift, poverty, and I want to thank them for the rest of my life. Really, but thank you, Mama and Babo.
And we're back. So now we'll be discussing the awards run of Life is Beautiful. It was nominated for 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director for Roberto Benigni, Best Actor for Roberto Benigni, Best Original Screenplay, Best Film Editing, Best Original Score, and Best Foreign Language Film. And it won Best Actor, and Best Original Score, and Best Foreign Language Film. And so leading up to the Oscars, I was almost said Life of Pi. Jeez. Life is Beautiful debuted at the Cannes Film Festival, where it won the grand prize of the jury there. And Roberto, he won at SAG, he won at BAFTA for Best Actor, and the film itself won most of the foreign language film prizes among critics. And then, of course, we had Shakespeare in Love, which won the Golden Globe, the SAG Ensemble, the BAFTA, the WGA, and then we had Saving Private Ryan, which won the Golden Globe, the PGA, the DGA, and Critics' Choice. So I think the elephant in the room here is that there's clearly these two films, which are Shakespeare in Love and Saving Private Ryan, that were really just one of the more iconic sort of dueling films, and we didn't know which one would actually end up winning Best Picture because they had a lot of great precursors, both of them. Life is Beautiful did not have as many, clearly, but I'm curious to know from either of you if you think Life is Beautiful at one point, or even now, in a different time where the Oscars are more clearly open to rewarding films in another language, whether this film could have won Best Picture in a different year.
I still think that in this era, there really wasn't a great urgency to reward films that were not predominantly in English. Mm-hmm. And I think in this particular year, it's just so easy to see that dichotomy between Shakespeare in Love and Saving Private Ryan that I really don't think that there was room for Life is Beautiful. To me, it just comes across as very much in third place. Like, people like it a lot, especially during this year, and they had a lot of affection for it. But I don't think that there was really the mentality to put it above either of those other two movies or give Best Picture to a film that wasn't in English.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it had, again, all of those nominations is still a huge accomplishment for a film at that time, particularly a foreign film. And the fact that it went from Cannes all the way to the Oscars is really impressive. But I don't see it beating any of those two. Those were two very solid movies. It was, in general, an incredibly solid year. Mm-hmm. And the fact that I think that giving the Oscar to Roberto for Best Actor is kind of a way of the Academy saying, we love what you did.
That is probably true. And I still look at that win, and a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, I would say it's divisive, that win overall. And some people say that it hasn't necessarily held up as much. Others, still, I mean, personally, I definitely don't rate it as one of the best actor wins of all time by any means, but I can at least appreciate it just from how different that performance is compared to so many others in that category.
Yeah, I think it's another one of those situations where the performance isn't that bad. Like, I'm not that taken with it, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad performance. But I think it's a situation where you look at the competition, and I think people take more umbrage with what it beat.
There's a lot of incredibly talented people in the Best Actor category. And I want to say a thing about Life is Beautiful. Roberto Benigni is the star of that movie. He is the face of it. He not only starred in it, he directed it, he wrote it. It's very much his. So when you're awarding the film, you're also kind of awarding him. So the same thing as vice versa. When you're rewarding him for Best Actor, you're also rewarding the film. So I really do see it as we're giving this also to Life is Beautiful. We're not going to give you the Oscar. We're going to give you the Best Foreign Film Oscar. We're going to give you Best Actor, but that's really us saying you did a great job. But again, we have two really incredibly strong, powerful, huge films in the Best Picture category that were impossible to beat, I think.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting scenario where it's almost like when the Oscars reward a film in screenplay, almost, as I guess you could say a consolation prize, where it's like you're not going to win Best Picture, but here's this appreciation for the work you did, and to bring it back to Jojo Rabbit, it is like a Taika Waititi giving him Best Adapted Screenplay in a way, but instead it's in Best Actor. So, that's a very unique situation to this, where you have a filmmaker who is also in an acting category there. But yeah, I mean, this is one of those situations where there's no real argument that Life is Beautiful could even be a runner-up to Shakespeare in Love, just because of the nature of this race. And again, Saving Private Ryan is pretty much one of like a top 5 clearest runners-up that there is in Oscar history. And so, yeah, I'm not even gonna bother asking either of you if you really think that Life is Beautiful was a runner-up, but I would say that it probably wasn't necessarily that distant overall, because I have a feeling there was a lot of support just emotionally, people who really connected to what Benigni did with the film, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I would say it was in third place, but it wasn't a distant third.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not really a lot of discussion you can go from there as far as other hypotheticals, but at least you can say it's ahead of Elizabeth and the Thin Red Line. Probably.
Yeah. I
it's
would
definitely
I would say.
solid in third. I would rank it number 3 personally.
Yeah. So now it's time for the quiz. Everyone always has a mixed reaction to this. You'll be fine.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So just to recap, we've got 7 questions here, 6 multiple choice. The last one is open-ended, just in case. First person to 4 points is our winner. And remember, these are multiple choice questions. Please let me read all of the answers before ringing in. You can make any sort of noise you want to indicate that you know the answer. And yeah, that's that. Are we ready?
All right, bring it on.
We got this.
All right. Question 1. What does Guido call Dora's fiancé? A. Rodolfo. B. The clown. C. The jerk the eggs fell on. Or D. The explorer.
Buzz.
Josh.
The jerk the eggs fell on.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Very good. Moving on to question 2. In response to a store that doesn't allow Jews and dogs in their establishment, what do Guido and Joshua decide to ban from their bookstore? A. Spiders and ghouls. B. Spiders and Visigoths. C. Spiders and schoolteachers. Or D. Nothing. All are welcome.
Wait, I know this. Give me a minute. Buzz?
Lauren?
Is it spiders and Visigoths?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good. We're tied 1-1 going into question 3. All right. Before Roberto Benigni won Best Actor, how many other actor-directors had directed themselves to an Oscar-winning performance? A. 1, B. 2, C. 3, or D. 0?
Buzz.
Josh?
I think it was just 1.
That is correct.
Okay.
Ooh.
Can I say who it was?
You won't get another point, but sure.
That's all right. I mean, it's Oscar trivia. I don't care.
Okay.
Was it Olivier for Hamlet?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
The classic.
Yes, and we just talked about it on the show. So, timely. All right, moving on to question 4. Which Best Picture nominee from 1998 won the all-important Toronto Film Festival People's Choice Award?
Ooh.
A. Shakespeare in Love. B. Saving Private Ryan. C. Elizabeth. Or D. Life is Beautiful.
I'll buzz.
Okay, Josh.
I have an educated guess.
Okay, well, either one of you say it, whoever says it first.
Shakespeare
I'm
in
going to
Love.
guess Shakespeare in Love.
You both guessed Shakespeare in Love, and you're both wrong. The winner of the Toronto International Film Festival People's Choice Award was Life is Beautiful.
Yeah. Well,
Which
I
is
figured it
classic
couldn't have been.
winner.
Yeah, it couldn't have been Saving Private Ryan because that was like.
Yeah, there's no way.
Yeah,
Right.
that was already out by that point.
Yes.
So.
Very good. Well, neither of you get the point.
Yeah.
As we move on to question 5. Roberto Benigni has never been nominated again. while his competition in Best Actor have all received at least one follow-up nomination. But which of his competitors was not nominated for a film that came out in the 2010s? A. Tom Hanks. B. Ian McKellen. C. Nick Nolte. Or D. Edward Norton.
Buzz.
Josh?
It was Ian McKellen.
That is correct. Very good. Because Ian McKellen was nominated for the first Lord of the Rings film, which did not come in the 2010s, of course.
Oh,
Yeah.
I forgot Edward Norton was in Birdman.
Yep.
Yeah.
Tom Hanks' Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood just got in at the last second there.
Sweet pie.
And Nick Nolte for Warrior.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Josh, I believe you're up 3-1 now, correct? Yes, I think you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, moving on to question 6. Life is Beautiful won Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars, giving another victory to Italy. How many Italian films have won Best Foreign Language Film since then? A. 1. B. 4. C. 2. D. 0. Lauren?
I want to say 1.
That is correct. Can you
It's
name
the
the
Great-
one?
The Great Beauty.
That is correct. Very good.
Yeah.
You know your stuff.
My grandpa would be proud.
Yeah. So, Josh, you're up 3-2 as we move on to our final question.
Oof.
Lauren could tie it up, or
Oh my
Josh
God, the
could
pressure
win.
is on.
Yes. And this, in the spirit of Life is Beautiful, is a riddle.
Oh, God.
And if you watch the film, hopefully you will know the answer to this. The dwarves and Snow White sit down for a bite. How fast can you guess what she serves her guests next?
Buzz.
Josh?
It's 7 seconds.
That is correct, Josh.
Yeah.
I was about to just scream silence, but then
No, that's the other riddle.
That's the other one. Right. But well done, Josh. You've redeemed yourself.
Yeah. I mean, the first time would get out was rough, but yes, I have redeemed myself.
Well done. But you both did a great job.
as
So,
long as I got the Italian question right, I
Yes.
could tell him I don't know.
yes.
That's the only thing that mattered. That was
Yeah.
worth like 3 points to you.
Yeah.
We're good. The heritage is still there.
There you go. So, Lauren, Josh, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Yes. And of course, you're both welcome back anytime. So, tell the people where they can find more from you on the internet. Let's start with Josh.
You can find my writing over at Next Best Picture, where you can see reviews and editorials and podcasts I do over there. And you can also find me on Twitter at JR
And Lauren.
You can also find some of my work over at the Next Best Picture, including podcast articles and reviews and fun stuff over there. And you could also follow me on Twitter at Lauren LaMango.
Very good. And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. And you can find the podcast anywhere you find podcasts, of course. Rate, review, subscribe. Thank you to the patrons who are listening thus far, who I very much appreciate. Thank you so much. And with that, thanks again, Josh. Thanks again, Lauren. And I will bid you all adieu.